so Patricia, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sí, well, like Nancy mentioned, soy maestra español. Yo conocí a Nancy cuando estaba en la universidad y somos muy buenas amigas y me encanta todo lo que ella hace con ellas. Así es que me invitó una vez a una conferencia de 2 años para dar una workshop sobre la educación y lo que es la pedagogía, y el año pasado volví a hacer la conferencia otra vez, me mencionó sobre estos podcasts y pienso que es una idea muy bonita, muy linda de conectarse con la gente, un momento cuando estamos todos un poco paniqueados, asustados o a veces encerrados en casa, y sí, es todo.
Buenísimo.
Gracias, Patricia. Maca.
Me olvidé que estaba muteado. Hola, bueno, soy Macarena de Argentina. Soy, bueno, digamos que periodista, porque en realidad no estudié periodismo, pero trabajo de eso. Escribo para una revista digital y online de cine y series. Bueno, eso, básicamente.
Qué padre, desde Argentina entonces.
Sí, de Argentina.
Wow. Saludos, un placer conocerte, Maca.
Igualmente.
Gracias por estar aquí.
Hola, Maca.
Hola, Ivana.
Lori.
Hola, me llamo Loribet y soy de República Dominicana. Trabajo comunicación audiovisual y un poquito más o menos lo que hace Maca.
Y eres actriz, Lori, también eres actriz.
Sí,
no eres
sí, también y hago sketches también, sí, y soy actriz.
Gracias, Lori. Te salió lo de la actriz, ya te buscaremos.
Es verdad, es actriz y hace comedia muy buena.
Bueno, gracias.
Qué padre, Lori. Después ahí por el chat que tenemos aquí, si quieres compartimos todas nuestras Instagram o tu canal de YouTube o lo que tengan para mantenernos conectadas. Y Ivana, una quick intro, aunque creo que todos te conocemos.
Yo soy Ivana, estoy en Los Ángeles, soy actriz, a veces productora, ahora emprendedora de tecnología también. Trabajo con muchas organizaciones de diferentes cosas. La verdad que depende del día de la semana lo que hago. Este es Chico básicamente duerme todo el día, es todo lo que hace. Y sí, soy fanática de las historias y de storytelling. Overall, creo que haga lo que haga, todo tiene el común denominador que son las historias.
Sí, gracias Ivana y gracias Chico por estar aquí también. Bueno, empiezo yo por mi parte. Bueno, creo que yo y Ivana somos las únicas que escuchamos los podcasts, pero básicamente la idea es el poder de las historias. Y uno de los podcasts, después les recomiendo que cuando terminemos la llamada, ahí están los links en el correo que recibieron con la confirmación, habla sobre el poder de las historias. Y estoy mirando abajo porque estoy mirando mis notas, pero una de las cosas que me pareció muy interesante es que esto es lo que apunté, es why it's important to tell them even though you think no one is listening. Porque muchas de las veces, por lo cual son importantes, aunque tú pienses que nadie te está escuchando, tu historia se puede identificar con otra persona y son como esos espacios vulnerables, lo que hace como que crea esa relación. Entonces me gustó mucho la historia de esta Belén Robles. Fue una de las mujeres principiantes que se unió a LULAC, que es una organización ahorita que es Latino, Civil Rights. Y ella cuenta que cuando estaba buscando empleo, entró a uno de los lugares donde iba a aplicar y le dijeron, oh, estás equivocada. Básicamente, ella es mexicana. Le dicen, aquí nomás empleamos a mexicanos para lo que son janitors, y básicamente le dijeron nomás como personal de limpieza.
Exacto.
Y ella, a mí me impactó mucho escuchar eso, porque obviamente ahorita es una profesional que ha tenido mucho, a lot of success, pero dice que ella cuando se reunió con la persona que la iba a entrevistar, le dijo, bueno, ahorita no tenemos nada disponible, pero después te llamamos, y nunca le llamaron. Y cuando estaba escuchando esa parte de la historia, al poder de las historias, es que yo me identifiqué porque yo, muchas de las personas, cuando yo les digo que entrevisté para Univision 4 veces antes de que me dieron el puesto, es como que no se la creen. Me dijeron, ¿en serio 4 veces? Y es sí, y me dijeron no. A ver, está Emily, se reunió alguien más aquí a la conversación. Hi, Emily. Okay. Thank you for joining us. So, Emily, do you speak English, Spanish?
I speak both.
Okay, we're switching off. We're doing Spanglish conversations here, so I just want to make sure. Thank you for joining us. We're discussing right now the podcasts, okay?
Okay.
So, wait, Emily, are you one of Patricia's students?
Yes.
Hi, Emily.
Hi.
Patricia
Hi.
sending you a message. Thank you for joining us. Are you from McBride High School?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. Do you want to tell us a little bit? Well, now that we're here with you, can you just quickly introduce yourself?
Okay. So I'm in the 11th grade. My name is Emily Agurcia, and I attend McBride High School. And I know Miss Martinez because I take her AP Spanish language class.
Thank you for joining us, Emily. We're excited to have you. I'm not sure, were you one of the students that attended our ELLAS conference last year?
No, I wasn't able to. I registered, but I wasn't able to go.
Okay.
11th grade is how old? I'm curious.
Like 17, right, Emily?
16.
16. Oh, gosh.
I'm jealous.
Same here. Well, thank you were you able to listen to the podcasts?
No, I just saw this and I wasn't
Okay.
even prepared for it, but I'm sorry.
No worries.
No,
I'm
it's
sure
fine.
right now when you kind of start listening to the conversation and what everybody's sharing, I'm sure you'll have a story yourself to share. Okay? Okay, thank you, Emily. Okay, so the podcast, so I think that story of Belen Robles really touched upon me because, one, the fact that she got told in her face, sorry, we don't hire Mexicans unless you're cleaning service. And 2, they told her, like, okay, we'll call you back. She never heard back. And 3, this kind of gave her that fire and that passion to do something. And she joined LULAC, the civil rights, Latino civil rights organization. And with me, I remember the first time as an intern, I really wanted to intern for Univision. And I remember the interview being very intense. And I remember the question that I got asked that threw me off was like, why would we choose you over somebody who has a communication or journalism major? Because my background was Spanish translation interpretation, because I wanted to go into court interpreting. But then I did an internship at that, and I'm like, I can't do this. And I felt like I got really nervous, obviously. I remember I cried. I had class after that interview, and I couldn't even go into class. I remember I wrote a quick email as a follow-up, and I really positioned myself in that email. That led me to getting the internship because of that email I sent, not necessarily because of the response I gave in that moment, because it was horrible, but the fact that I sat down and I wrote out an email and I explained myself and why I wanted this position. I got the internship, and I applied, like I mentioned, 4 times, and I interviewed those 4 times, and it was no, it's okay, maybe you don't have that experience, until I got the job. And I've spent 5 years at Univision. And another thing that recently happened with transitioning into tech and now being at Google is that when the opportunity came, I have no tech background. My whole background has been media. communication. So a lot of the requirements was like minimum 3 to 5 years in the tech industry, must be knowledgeable and this and that. And I had zero, but that's once again, I'm like, I didn't have any knowledge. I wasn't a communication journalist major when I started in Univision, and I started working in sales, and I ended up working in news. And I was also a digital content producer, and I wrote a lot of the stories for the Bay Area community. That's what I did for a little bit over a year. So why am I saying I can't do this? And I applied. And then next thing you know, one interview, second interview, third interview, and it was like the final offer. And there was this idea where we kind of limit ourselves sometimes if we want to, but there's always that passion in you that when they say no, or when you think no, you just go for it. And that's what led me to be where I am, because even though I was getting so many no's at the beginning, I remember getting out of college, I didn't even land a job at McDonald's. Like McDonald's said no to me, Walmart said no to me, Church Chicken. I was just trying to work anywhere, and I wasn't able to get a job. But it's until I started kind of aiming higher, because I'm like, I went to school for this. Why am I thinking I'm not capable of it? And that led me ultimately. So from that podcast, that's what I got, like how sharing those vulnerable moments really connects me with other people versus pretending like I'd never had all those struggles and just painting a different picture to people, because that's not the case. Like, this is the story that I had. This is what led me to where I am. And it wasn't easy, but I'm not going to paint a picture that, oh no, the interview process was super smooth. They loved me. I was like overqualified, when that was not the case. I knew I needed to work to get those qualifications, and I eventually am where I am today. The other one that I found really interesting was the 6-minute podcast about storytelling helps hospital staff learn about the person, not just the patient. And I love that. And I'm going to quote something that the doctor said, Dr. Jim Maloney. It says, it gives you a much better understanding of the entirety of their life and how to help them make a decision.
Right.
I loved when he said that, because it's like, you go in there as a patient, and they have your medical records and they know that part of you, but this whole way of thinking, of actually understanding and knowing their stories, not only, there was a follow-up quote that he says, is that knowing a patient's life story makes it easier to have a difficult conversation. So I really like that concept, and I really hope that more medical professionals start applying it.
Right.
In this case, I think they had specifically like a part-time or a full-time opening for somebody dedicated to writing these stories. But I thought that is true, because even with our stories that we have, it's those places again when we're vulnerable. It's when we actually connect, when we're real, when we're raw, versus painting a fake picture. We're not necessarily connecting with those other stories that people want to relate to. So if anybody wants to chime in and add anything in regards to the power of stories.
Well, I think that one of the things, bueno, lo explicaré en español rápidamente, pero una de las cosas del segundo podcast, que para los que no lo pudieron escuchar, básicamente explica cómo en un hospital hicieron esta dinámica en la que un voluntario se sentaba con pacientes y escuchaba su historia y la escribía y hacía como mini biografías de cada paciente para incluir en los archivos de cada paciente. Entonces, cuando un doctor recibía un paciente nuevo o un paciente cambiaba de doctor, el doctor podía leer su file médico y aparte esta biografía que explicaba un poco de la vida del paciente más allá de términos médicos, sino de la vida en general del paciente. Y que el tener la historia de la persona aparte de su información médica los ayudaba a hacer desde mejores evaluaciones médicas hasta cometer menos errores, hasta hacerlo más personal. Entonces, que a veces las enfermeras hasta se sentaban como a platicar con ellos en su tiempo libre porque habían leído su historia y demás. Ese era básicamente el podcast. Ahora, in terms of that's basically what the podcast was about. I thought a lot about this because there were, I mean, I'm going to be completely honest because I think that's the whole point of these discussions as well.
Yes.
That there's, there's a lot of complexity around everything. I thought of a lot of different scenarios in terms of this. One of them, and this is interesting because prefieren inglés o español. I don't know what to go on.
El que tú quieras.
A mí me da igual.
Sí, creo que todos español, inglés.
Da igual? Okay. Bueno, I'll go in English then. I think that, there's a whole part of the medical world and stories that I have a personal soft spot for. One of the things that immediately I thought of was there's this user on STORYPLACE. So STORYPLACE is this platform that I have where people share all kinds of stories, right? And one of the users on STORYPLACE is this girl who she works at Georgetown Hospital in Washington. And she wrote a story one day about the complexity of dealing with daily just death around you as a medical professional, and the difficulty how difficult it was for medical professionals to have to constantly deal with death and life and these kinds of elements, and somehow have to make it a very professional thing and not feel anything about it. And when I read this story, it made me think so much because, first of all, it made me realize how I had never once in my life considered the medical profession. Like, you always focus so much on the patient or the patient's family or the people affected, but never do you think, how has this affected the doctor or the nurse, maybe, who has taken care of the patient every single day, who has gotten to know the patient, all these days, and are actually the ones to have to deal with a lot of difficult things in terms of when somebody passes away. So it just opened my eyes so much to how narrow my vision of this was in terms of thinking of patients in hospitals and things like these. So it was very interesting when I heard this podcast because I thought once again of how limited or narrow my vision of just medical things in general is, right? And I think that there's two sides to it, because I think that on the one hand, you have doctors and medical professionals who it is so difficult to separate your personal opinions, to separate that from medical opinions or medical standards or things you have to do sometimes, that I think there is a benefit to being very professional about it and not getting involved with the person's story in a way. For example, I mean, I could get into so many different things, but my sister once said that she was worried about being an organ donor because she felt that people who were organ donors, that when you were in a critical life or death situation,
right,
there was less efforts put into it if you were an organ donor. And somehow I thought about this as well, because I think that when you know somebody's story, so for example, if you read somebody's story and you realize that they've done so much good and so many things for other people and blah, blah, should that change the way in which you treat the patient or the decisions that you make with this medical decision making, rather than if it was somebody who you read their story and turns out that their entire life, I don't know, they advocated for something that you personally are against. Right. I just think that it opens the doors to a lot of biases that in medical professions could be both. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that it made me think a lot of how, but again, it comes back to the power that a story can have. And I think that is the essence of the message, at least for me, is realizing just how powerful a person's story can be. And it's not something to be taken lightly. And it's something to realize how, you know, that it has the potential to change somebody's perspective, or to, you know, I mean, I don't know, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, I totally agree. And you know what's coincidentally, before we jumped on this conversation, my fiance and I were watching a video of a doctor in a hospital in Spain. And he's just like losing it in the interview because he's being interviewed and he feels like media is not necessarily in a way telling the situation that they're going through. And obviously right now, like Italy and Spain are the two countries that are really being affected just because of the resources that they don't have in this time that they need them. And his frustration, like he forgot that he was on live TV, and that connected to this podcast, you know, because I thought about, yes, we're always so committed in telling the story of the patient, or at least but we're not necessarily thinking about the story of the medical like person behind it.
They're not robots.
Yeah, and this person, like he was the doctor crying on air. Like you can tell the anchor was kind of thrown off. They didn't really know how to like he couldn't end it, but he didn't even really know how to continue and ask questions and do his job. But the doctor you can generally tell his frustration. He's like, I feel so like I'm not able to do and help as I would like because of the resource. We don't have them. So when somebody comes in and they're asking me how their loved one is doing, it's hard for me to look at them and say like, that we're not going to be able to do anything. And just his frustration and his story being in that medical field and being in the front lines. And that's what's currently a lot of people are living. And unfortunately, we do get to see them sometimes if they on social media, we come across them. But the amount of time this person got on air and how he was sharing that story space, it clicked back to this and what you were saying, Ivana, that they're always so consumed about the patient. And even right now, Dr. I always have a hard time saying his name. Fauci, the one right now doing all the press conferences, leading this global pandemic. Today, I'm like, he looks exhausted. I'm like, is somebody gonna ask him? I would like to know how is he doing?
Right, exactly.
Because the guy gets every day he's doing interviews. The guy has mentioned before that he's working like 15 hours a day. Like, what kind of toll does that take on him? Because he's answering the questions and he's being very informative and he's doing his job. But today when I was looking at him, I'm like, oh my God, that poor guy looks exhausted. Like he looks like somebody can tell him, go take a vacation. If he could, he would right now.
Right, yeah.
But there are those stories, and I just found it very, very interesting, and it ties back to the whole idea of the power of stories. Does anybody want to share any stories of their personal story that you guys, or stories that might have influenced you? Patricia, Emily, Maca, Lori?
I'll share a story, and it piggybacks on the same thing that you guys have been talking about, but on social media, right, we don't really get the backside or the backstory to it. We just we do see details. And so I was watching something about, same thing, it was a doctor, it was a nurse, and she was crying, she was really upset and distraught, and the problem was that she was told to go into I'm sorry, I have like bad audio, but she was told to go onto a level where she was going to treat patients who tested positive for COVID, and she's making a video recording herself quitting that day, and she's really upset. And obviously I just go into the comments to see what people say right away, and people were like, oh, well, you signed up for that, that's your job, you should know better, just deal with it, oh well. And after digging up her story a little bit more, I come to find out that she's a cancer survivor and that she had beat cancer. I think that was her third time beating cancer, and she has children at home, and she doesn't have anyone else that could care for her kids. So if she goes into that room, she can no longer or that floor where she's treating patients who tested positive, she can no longer take care of her children. She can no longer, she has to be without them for 2 weeks. And it was sad to see how quick we are to jump to like conclusions or assumptions and judge people and call them out and say, oh, she's not doing her job right, or she's, and I even saw other comments saying, oh, she shouldn't be recording this because she could lose her job for medical abandonment. And that's obviously a term that I don't know because I'm field. And so I also Googled it and did some research just because I was curious. And, there's all these, things that nurses or doctors or practitioners can lose their jobs for. So I thought that was really powerful. But at the same time, I thought, well, she comes first, her children come first, her livelihood and everything comes first. So that, I don't know, that was a tough video to watch, and I think it was powerful to see her story and her side to it. So.
That's a very, very good point. Arab is here to say hello.
Hi.
Bye and say hello.
Hi, Arab.
He heard the podcast with me.
Yeah, we had a deep conversation about that this morning, and I do think there's a lot of very profound things being done, and I'm glad you guys are going to get together and talk about this.
Thank you. Do you have any feedback you want to share in regards to the podcasts?
Well, I do believe that sharing stories has a profound impact, and it makes us more empathic to the people around us. And I do believe, especially in the healthcare industry, to make people more human and not just a case number. I think that really gives us, gets it out of this kind of academic thing, and it makes it more about two human beings trying to connect and trying to help each other out. So I really feel there's a powerful thing in just seeing everybody as ourselves.
I agree. I loved what they're starting this initiative. Like Ivana just mentioned as well, that we're always so focused on the patient. And we're just even thinking, right now I just brought up Dr. Fauci. I'm like slaughtering his name, but he's always the one right now dealing with the whole COVID pandemic, that he's constantly in interviews, press conferences, in front of the camera. And today I was looking at the guy and I'm like, he looks exhausted. I wish somebody would just interview him to ask him how he's doing.
Yeah.
How is he doing? How is he dealing with him? Because this is not only stressful physically, but mentally, emotionally. So I love that we can understand, I guess, both parts with this. Not only for the patient and understanding and creating that relationship better, but also understanding, hear those stories from the medical professionals.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for listening with Ivana. I'm glad
thank
that
you
guys
guys.
enjoyed it.
Thank you for sharing this and continue to share it. I think it's a great message, a great mission, and just to keep on making human beings more human with each other. And I think especially now after this, everybody's going to realize the importance of the human element, of everything can go away, money can go away, power can go away, everything, but all that remains is human interaction.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like, no matter the differences, right? I mean, that applies to the medical field, but it's really, I mean, the message I think applies across industries. It's a matter of every single person in the world is a human being with stories, with issues, with families, with emotions. So everyone has a story behind what you see. And I think that, I deal with this with STORYPLACE daily, but I truly believe that empathy is about separating listening from agreeing, and really understanding that even if somebody has a completely different, I always use the example of sports teams because it's just an easy one to explain, but I think it applies to anything. But for example, if you have a diehard Red Sox fan and a diehard Yankees fan, right? And they're looking at each other and they're you know, they're hating each other because their teams are complete opposite and whatever. But if you really sit each one down and ask them how they became, I don't know, a fan of their team, it's more likely than not that both their stories are going to stem from a common denominator, whether it's family, whether it's a memory with something, whether it's a friendship, an experience. And so you realize that human beings are really made up of very essential common values. And then whatever stories stem from that, sure, they can differentiate. But once you realize that we all stem from common denominators, it makes empathy more doable.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so,
I agree. Really agree. And with what I mentioned earlier, that's when you really make a connection, because you can tell when people just try to paint a picture versus genuinely showcasing those vulnerable moments. And that's when people identify. I know personally for me, when I shared something very like vulnerable from myself on social media, a lot of people send me DMs and telling me like those deep secrets that they haven't even shared with their parents. And I'm just like, oh my God, that touched many people versus something totally random that I can upload, like, oh my God, I'm enjoying the day at the beach, blah, 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 versus an actual story of why I might be at the beach. It might be, you know what, I had a really sucky week. I felt like I failed at work. I did this and that. I wanted to come to the beach to just kind of detox. There's, you know, it's the reality of why I'm there versus let me pretend like my world is perfect, because it's
I just saw a video that a friend of mine did, this kind of sketch thing. It was for a campaign. I don't remember what it was for, but it was two girls that come meet up at a coffee place, and one tells the other one, you know, oh, what are you doing? Are you still at your job? And she goes, yeah, it's great. I'm actually, you know, in line to get a promotion. What about you? And she's like, yeah, same. Oh, it's been so good catching up. And then they both leave. Cut to each of them in their house just crying to their parents on the phone saying, I can't find a job. I hate this. And it's like, it's so real. It's so true, because I think that we're so used to designing, you know, almost as if whatever it is you design for other people to see is your reality, you know, as if that's going to somehow become a reality just like that. And so there's this constant, and I think it has a lot to do with social media as well. I mean, honestly.
Well, yeah, social media has become that. It's become your kind of catered
your designed
image of that you want to do. You know, you tailor your own little perfect world to present to everybody. However, now people really react more deeply and more emotionally when you are vulnerable, when you are able to open yourself.
Because it's become rare.
Yeah, and you just kind of
that's it.
Are not afraid of just being naked emotionally, not literally, okay, but naked emotionally, you know, in public places like Twitter and Instagram. And you just say, okay, I'm having a sucky day, I'm not feeling so good today, or whatever happened. And that makes people realize that they're dealing with a human being that also has, you know, sucky days like all of us do sometimes. So I don't know. I think just realizing that there's a human being behind that label of doctor or nurse or patient or Instagram user 2345. There's always a human being behind that has the same basic needs, you know. So yeah, I really applaud that you bring this conversation forward. So spreading this.
Thank you. And I do feel like we have a bigger responsibility also when it comes to Gen Z, you know, as like the millennials, because there's been statistically depression amongst those that are growing, you know, because they see all these influencers or this perfection, and then they compare themselves. I know I have a 12-year-old brother, and I found out he had an Instagram, and I'm like, first of all, you're too little to have an Instagram. But I found myself in one of those situations where nowadays it's just so hard, because he wants to be in the platform because his friends are there and he wants to be cool. If I take it away, is he gonna get bullied because he's like not the cool one? But then it's like, how do you find those? And then you see things, you read things, they're very well aware of what's going on in the world. And then they start comparing themselves. You know, I know my little brother, one time he told me, oh, my friend always uploads beautiful pictures of his big house. And to me, that like hurt me because obviously my parents have a small house. My mom is the only one that can work right now. My dad is he's not able to work because of some health conditions. So it's one of these things that is like, oh God, at 12, like this is what you're seeing.
Right,
Yeah,
you start comparing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you start feeding into what kind of the society of Western culture is feeding us, which is success equates to, you know, bigger house, bigger car, more cars, more wealth. Whereas in the East, people are more about how can I be happy with what I have. And I think that's right now is a great time to reevaluate that, because if right now that guy from the big house could not leave his big house, but he's all by himself, he won't be as happy as you guys if you're like in a small house, but it's a family of 5. So what is really being wealthy? And that's, I think, a great conversation to start having at that age, because they start realizing that everything that people are selling on social media is, you know, I have this great life, this big yacht, these, you know, big fast cars, whatever. And we're not maybe realizing that there can be another narrative about how good do I feel about myself? How happy am I today? So I think for younger generations, it's a good tool to start reshaping that whole narrative.
I agree. I think that social media has such an element of comparison. And I think that that is one of the most damaging elements of it. You know, this comparison status based on metrics that didn't exist, you know, like metrics like likes or followers, or not only that didn't exist, metrics that can be bought, metrics that can be bots, like robots.
They really don't measure the level. I mean, don't equate to happiness whatsoever.
And also metrics that are based on more on morbidity as well. O sea, como, like, I don't know, like, you know, you get, I've spoken to a lot of influencers and whatever that say, you know, if I post a picture of something that I care about, but that is not, you know, me or my body or whatever, I don't get as many likes. And so then, you know what I mean? Then it starts becoming this. You
become a slave to the likes, basically.
Right.
And you have to cater, people cater all their social media based on what people like more. So it's not you defining yourself, it's letting all of that define you.
Well, on STORYPLACE, a lot of people ask me, you know, well, how do I know who to follow if I can't see how many followers or likes anything has? And I say, well, what about follow somebody based on the stories that they have to tell? Like on the actual meaning of what they represent.
The content,
Right? Is that so rare? Is that such a wild thought, you know? And it is. But then people start kind of figuring it out. And sure, it's less, you know, yesterday we were talking about this, about how social media platforms can become so consuming and so addicting, and how I told Arab, like, so STORYPLACE isn't addicting. I don't think it's in that sense. And sure, maybe from a business standpoint you'd say, oh well, that's not great, but it's purposely like that. I mean, you know, for example, notifications.
But one of its things is a social platform that's good for your mental health.
Exactly.
And I think that's exactly what we're looking for.
It's not a platform that's going to be constantly telling you to look at your phone and hey, this happened. Hey, pay attention to this. Hey, this. No, it's about creating social connection while maintaining human connection. You know, and it's sometimes.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, because a lot of the times with notifications, it's that sense, like, oh my God, hey, I'm here,
urgency.
Yes.
And you know, they made this study about how that fires hormones in your brain, and when you have your phone out of reach and there's a text message coming in, the levels of cortisol in the stress hormone in your brain start going up. So you actually start getting stressed out that you haven't been able to pick up the phone to see that text message. So that's what it's creating. It's creating this dependency to always like have
withdrawal.
Your eyeballs transfixed on the screen. So yeah, I don't know. Let's change that.
No, going back into STORYPLACE and what you're doing, Ivana. What have you seen right now? Have you seen any difference in the way the app is being used, the content that's being uploaded during this time of the pandemic?
Entirely. You know, it's very interesting because obviously financially we're all at a very tough place in a very tough time. I was starting investment rounds, and obviously everything that happened just put everything on pause, which was very difficult because I had to reshift everything and kind of reevaluate how StoryPlace was going to keep surviving. But at the same time, activity and volume and stories and users went up to an all-time high. Even the analytics were saying, you know, anomalies, and there is still so much activity on StoryPlace, more than ever before. I think that, you know, it's a great time for anything digital. People are at home, people have more time. StoryPlace is an app that does require more patience and more time to actually sit down, read, write, reflect. And so there's been so many stories. We have a topic going on right now that it says, you know, let's talk about the coronavirus situation. There's been so many stories being shared. Also because StoryPlace is in over 90 countries. So there's people in all these different stages of the situation sharing their opinions about it. And one of the reasons why I decided to do the topic was because there was so much news and so many things and so much information. And I said, you know, I want to hear about people, like actual people. How are you dealing with it? If you suddenly need to work from home, how are you handling having your home be your office and not going insane? And how are you dealing with the relationship and quarantine? How are you dealing with, no, really, I mean, I think it puts any relationship to test, personally.
Why do you say it?
I think that, you know, if you have kids at home, I mean, my respect goes out to all the parents out there. I can't imagine having to entertain children in addition to managing a relationship and a pet, you know, and work and home. I mean,
now we realize the value of the importance of teachers.
But you know, there were so much information out there, but there weren't a lot of actual stories that you could learn tips and tricks and insight into how to practically day to day put it into practice. So what we were getting was all this panic from news without any information. And the end of the day, you know, anxiety and fear comes from a place of lack of information and of uncertainty. And so that's why I wanted to create this topic of all these stories. And it worked great because there's been so many stories being shared. And a lot of people, even, for example, my nephew, who for months and months and months, I would say even almost a year, I've been trying to get him to forget about, like, write a story. Just create an account on StoryPlace. Like, he's, I don't know, 18. And he wrote a story. And when I read his story, it was so profound.
Yeah.
And I was so proud. Like, it was one of the highlights of my, because he was the epitome of, like, that audience that I was unable to tap into.
And you wrote such a beautiful
Oh my God. And we have Emily here, Emily Agurcia, that's a high school student. Emily, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and maybe share how you're currently doing, because now you're practically homeschooling yourself.
Hey guys, before that, I'm going to say goodbye, okay?
Okay. Thank you for joining.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
He's been cooking, by the way.
Nice.
Very much so. He's been cooking daily.
Ivana has him busy. Yes, Emily.
So as a viewpoint, as a 16-year-old right now, school online has been pretty interesting, and you know, I had a personal problem of, you know, getting internet, and talking about outside looks with tying in with what you guys were discussing about social media. I mean, I live in I'm very blessed to be living in a huge house. And a lot of people thought, how does this, you know, when my neighbors were I was asking if I could borrow their Wi-Fi, and they asked me, well, you guys don't have Wi-Fi. And the reason why I'm in this house is actually ties, I think this is all tying in together wonderfully. My mom used to be a housekeeper, like, you know, cleaning houses, and she was blessed to work with this man. His name is Myron, and during that process, you know, I was a baby when I entered through this house, and I was raised as he was like my grandpa. And tying in with the medical perspective, he passed away, and but throughout the process, we had a lot of medical professionals coming here because he was in the hospice program, which is for people who are terminal illness. And a lot of people made a lot of looks because I'm Hispanic, and my mama, she's Hispanic too. So I remember when one of the workers came inside, and I heard them coming in, and I already knew what was going on. And I came outside, le dije, Mami, ¿dónde están mis zapatos? No los encuentro. And the look that they gave me, like, oh, what's going on? Like, I thought the lady here was a caregiver, and we would live in Grandpa's house. And we got to tell our story with the professional there. We told him our current situation, and I feel like it made us because the healthcare professional was a Latina person, so I guess it got us closer together. And it's true that it's important for people to share their stories, a patient to a medical person, because it ties them together in a way. And we got the family. The family also connects to the health professional because they feel more open and happy because the person, they could tell their story and let it all out. So I think it's important to not ignore the outside looks and focus on more about like the content, like you guys were saying. And it's just so interesting. And I think everything happens for a purpose. And then if you could express that purpose, it's great.
Oh my gosh, Emily, thank you so much. Love this. I love how
amazing.
open and how genuine you were. And I hope that Ivana and I come across your stories in STORYPLACE.
Yeah.
You can download that on your phone or have access to it. I believe you can access it through desktop too, right, Ivana?
You can. It's just storyplacesocial.com. And then you go in and you can immediately start reading and sharing all kinds of stories.
Thank you. I'll check it out.
Yeah, please do. You're a great storyteller. And you have so much, I don't know, it's interesting because I think that sharing a story or even realizing that you have one, and not only your story, but the story along with all the reflections that come with it, is a very mature thing to accomplish. And at your age, it is also a rare thing to have. So you should embrace that.
Thank you.
Yes, Emily. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm glad you were able to get internet.
Yes, I was able to. But, it's all about research. And I found out that a lot of companies are giving 2 months free internet. Another blessing. So thank you.
Yes. Oh, that's awesome. I didn't know that. That's good. I'm gonna look it up.
Let me switch my account.
Let me temporarily suspend my internet. Well, thank you so much, ladies. Does anybody, Lori, Maca, we didn't hear much from you too, but do you guys want to add anything else before we close off the conversation?
I think I would. Voy a hablar en español porque
Sí,
que Lori
claro.
quiere que hablemos en español. Tendría un montón de cosas para decir. Por empezar, creo que tuve la suerte de crecer en una casa donde mi papá es médico, así que siempre tuve la perspectiva del otro lado, pero también la del paciente porque él trabaja directamente en las casas de los pacientes, o sea, tiene que ir siempre a visitarlos. Entonces crecí sabiendo la perspectiva del médico, pero también conociendo las historias personales de los pacientes, o sea, nunca los vi como sus enfermedades o como lo que padecían, sino como las personas a las que mi papá iba a su casa, ha comido con ellos, les regalan cosas, o sea, los conozco desde una perspectiva mucho más humana, y creo que, bueno, tuve suerte de poder verlo de esa manera. Y creo que es una visión diferente, y creo que nunca me había dado cuenta hasta este momento que estábamos teniendo esta conversación que yo tenía esa perspectiva que tal vez no la tienen todos, que es difícil. Y sí, siempre tuve una admiración muy grande por la gente que se dedica a eso, porque creo que es un sacrificio muy grande y que tienen una responsabilidad impresionante, y hoy son muy importantes con todo lo que está pasando. Y después, bueno, Arab dijo que no nos dábamos cuenta tampoco el valor de los maestros y mi mamá es maestra también, o sea, tengo suerte. Y ella está involucrada mucho más porque trabaja también ahora a nivel sindical, así que está involucrada no solamente en enseñar, sino también en el lugar que ocupan los maestros dentro de eso. Y ahora que estamos todos acá en cuarentena, me doy cuenta de un montón de cosas que antes no veía y de lo importante que son los roles de la gente como mi papá y como mi mamá dentro de la sociedad. En cuanto a cómo me está afectando la cuarentena, yo trabajo ya desde mi casa hace 2 años, así que mi rutina no cambió demasiado, pero sí pensé que no me había afectado hasta que en los últimos días me di cuenta que estaba como durmiendo mal, o sea, creo que como la ansiedad me empezó a afectar desde ese lugar y sí me sirvió mucho poder ver y poder leer en redes sociales y bueno, también uso STORYPLACE, ya uso STORYPLACE hace tiempo, poder ver que hay otras personas que están pasando por lo mismo que yo, pero también poder ayudarlos a mucha gente que ahora está trabajando en su casa y no puede encontrar su ritmo, encontrar su lugar en eso. Yo que ya tengo esa rutina incorporada, poder ayudarlos desde ese lugar. Eso creo que es algo que está bueno y que en otras circunstancias no hubiera tenido la oportunidad de hacerlo o no me hubiera dado cuenta de cómo puede afectar a alguien que de repente tiene que encontrarse en una situación totalmente distinta y tener que formar una rutina en su propia casa, que es algo que a mí misma me costó también cuando hice la transición a trabajar a mi casa. No fue fácil para nada.
Muchísimas
Qué
gracias, Maca.
interesante y sí, qué bueno que te des cuenta porque sí tienes una perspectiva gracias a la profesión de tu mamá y tu papá muy única que no mucha gente tiene. Sí.
Sí, tienes un poquito de los dos. Súper interesante que hablamos sobre esos temas sin saberlo. Yo
Las
ni idea.
coincidencias no existen, no existen.
Para nada.
Exactamente.
Vamos a colgar y va a ir a abrazar así, va a ir a darles un abrazo.
Sí, a los dos. Lori,
Totalmente
¿quieres
cierto.
decir algo, Lori, antes de cerrar la conversación? Gracias,
Va, yo
Maca.
creo, a ver, apoyando un poquito lo que decía Maca, me di cuenta estos días que no es como que existe un rol en la sociedad que es como muy importante, sino que todos los roles son súper importantes, porque ahora sí es verdad que es vital ciertos profesionales, pero es como que todos somos indispensables, porque también es importante la gente que está haciendo contenidos para que el otro pueda tener una opción. En mi caso, que ayer lo comentaba con Maca, me encontré como con, padezco de 2 trastornos afectivos, entonces es como que ayer me di cuenta de lo importante que es para mí, por ejemplo, entretener y distraerme, y que a lo mejor hay un montón de gente en su casa que le pasa lo mismo y que necesita eso, y que ahora en la cuarentena, pues mira, es como que su salida y su medicina es eso. Entonces, como que todos en la sociedad tenemos un rol súper importante y lo ideal es que juntos vamos con esto. Y bueno.
Claro.
Eso.
Muchísimas gracias. Sí, estoy de acuerdo, Lori.
Totalmente de acuerdo. Creo que es sí. Es un momento que yo creo que de esto todo va a salir muy cambiado y todos vamos a salir muy cambiados.
Eso espero yo también.
Sí, yo hoy me di cuenta que parte de mi ansiedad venía de que me da de la incertidumbre de a qué vamos a regresar. Creo que de ahí venía gran parte de mi como ansiedad. Pero pues
sí, exactamente. Es como pensar si esta experiencia no nos hace mejores personas. No sé.
Claro.
Es como es difícil de poder, de pensar que esta experiencia que estamos viviendo, cualquier persona no te haga reflexionar un poco.
Exacto.
Pero muchísimas gracias a todos por unirse a esta conversación. Gracias, Ivana, por hablarnos un poco de STORYPLACE. Ahí en el área de comentarios para Emily, ahí puse la página web storyplacesocial.com, que la puedes usar desde tu computadora.
Qué buena conversación. Siento que necesitaba esta conversación.
Sin saberlo, la
¿De verdad?
necesitaba.
Sí, no, y muchísimas gracias que se unieron todos de distintas partes del mundo, unos de Argentina, del sur de California. Tú estás en Los Ángeles, ¿verdad, Ivana?
Sí.
Sí, yo estoy acá en el área de San Francisco, pero entonces me alegro mucho que todos tuvieron el tiempo de unirse a esta conversación y voy a estar, si siguen la cuenta de Ellas Century, voy a estar cada semana creando como estos eventos con diferentes podcasts, diferentes TED Talks, y va a ser mismo, como estas mismas conversaciones alrededor, que todo el mundo se una y distraerse un poco. Gracias, Emily. Gracias a todos. Muchísimas gracias, Ivana, por tomarte el tiempo.
Gracias.
Y ahí estaremos en comunicación todas por medio de STORYPLACE y las redes sociales. Gracias. Me encanta tu sudadera también.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Bye.
Nos vemos.
Bye.
Adiós.
Bye.